at 5:03 p.m. Second item on the agenda is public to address the board on any closed session agenda items. If you're addressing the board on a non-agenda item, please be aware that the provisions of the Brown Act prohibit the board from acting or discussing such matters at this meeting. Public comments are limited to 3 minutes per person per topic. To submit a question or comment on a closed session item, please complete the speaker card by the start of the board meeting at 5 p.m. During the meeting, speakers will be called upon to make their comment. Ms. Ellinger, do we have any public comment?
No, we do not.
Thank you. All right, we're going to convene to close session at 5:04 p.m. I call this meeting of the Belmont-Redwood Shores School District School Board to order at the open session at 6:17 p.m. Let's stand for the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Agenda item number 6, announcements report on closed session. We do have a report from the closed session. During closed session, the board voted 5-0 to approve a settlement agreement dated January 23rd. Sorry. Sorry. Oh, sorry. It looks like a date. Sorry. Settlement agreement 01-2023-24 between BRSSD and one student in lieu of pending litigation. Now moving on to item number 7, approval of the agenda and consent agenda.
There's one change tonight, item 7F, the approval of the certificated seniority list. We need to pull that item. There needs to be a little bit more work done before that can be approved by the board. So please pull item 7F.
Thank you. Any other modifications to the agenda? Can I get a motion to approve the agenda with pulling 7F?
Move to approve the agenda and consent agenda as modified.
Thank you. Second?
Aye.
Great, thank you. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Speakers wishing to address the board. So to submit a question or comment on a closed session item, please complete the speaker card by the start of the board meeting at 5 p.m. During the meeting, speakers will be called upon to make their comment. If you are addressing the board on a non-agenda item, please be aware that the provisions of the Brown Act prohibit the board from acting or discussing such matters at this meeting. Public comments are limited to 3 minutes per person per topic. Ms. Ellinger, are there any requests for public comment?
President Northup, no, there are not.
Thank you. Item number 9, the Board of Trustees report. I apologize in advance for my calling on you out of order tonight, and I've apologized for last month where I called people out of order. I would like to try to switch it up a little bit. I don't want to be the last word all the time, so if you guys don't mind, say if I start with David, if you don't mind, Mr. Koss, right now, then we could have for this, I'm happy to be last, but say later on in the meeting, if Mr. Koss starts with his questions, then we move to Mr. Bruno. I might occasionally like to give my questions, and then we do Dr. Howard and Mr. Leinbach. But I will call you in order this time to make it easier. So, Mr. Koss, would you like to start?
Sure. Thank you, President Northam. So first of all, I hope everyone had a very restful winter break, recharge their batteries and energy. Since coming back, I think a couple of things of note, mostly having to do with school force. So on January 9th, President Northup and I and CBO attended the board meeting, school force board meeting, the first, which is monthly. And it was an excellent meeting, both again, to continue the partnership that we have with them, the close partnership and collaboration to meet with them and their board. But also it was a very, very interesting board meeting because they were doing starting their strategic planning process, or in the middle of it. They had met separately on some different work streams and created some different working groups, but really came together And Paul Breslow, who is on the board of strategy, did an excellent job at moderating, using different models, SWOT, et cetera. But then it was very interactive with a platform to kind of then have report outs and kind of brainstorming. And I thought it was an excellent session. And I think that certainly they're going to emerge with great processes and it's a great strategic plan that they're doing. So to be mindful of that, I really give them kudos. The other thing that's currently going on that I'm also a part of as the Nesbitt, one of the Nesbitt co-chairs of Reading Power. So this is our largest fundraiser. It's the school force's largest fundraiser of the year. Traditionally, last year, students read collectively in the district 2 million minutes and raised $275,000. And we're about halfway through tomorrow. It ends January 28th. And I would really just encourage everybody to, obviously, it's one of my favorite events because it's focused on literacy, but it's also focused on the fun of reading. But at the end of it, there is a fundraising component. As much fun as the kids are having, we really need the funds raised to go towards buying for people and programs and really supporting the overall 2.75 million that School Force brings in. Again, this is the largest fundraiser, and I really want to encourage everybody to give what they can, to ask family and friends to support all the children in our district. So I hope you will keep this in mind as you do your individual school site events, and then also as it comes to January 28th, that you reach out to family and friends and consider donating to support our district children. And with that, that's all I kind of had. I want to wish everybody welcome back and Happy New Year.
Thank you, Mr. Koss. Mr. Bruno.
Yeah, I'll keep mine quick. Glad to be back in school and work and have my kids back in. There's a lot of reading happening in my house. Kids are awesome this year and they're making us do it, and I can admit that was necessary. So I read 30 minutes a day with my kids. They read way more than me, but at least I'm doing that, and it's been life-changing already, honestly. So yeah, I kind of forgot the joy of reading. So thank you, School Force, for having it, and thank my kids for spreading the love. Want to thank faculty, staff, all the way up to kind of superintendents for just a successful first semester. I think as a school board rep, like I kind of wait for when there'll be that moment that things happen. I'm not rushing it, but it felt, as I look back at it, I'm grateful that it happened. And as we go to the next one, it is School Board Recognition Month in January. So congratulations on all of you, and enjoy that tingly feeling. And I'm kind of, looking forward to more learning about the PDs, about school boarding coming up this semester. And look forward to working with you all for this year.
Thank you, Mr. Bruno. Dr. Howard.
Not much to say that has already been said. Enjoyed a break. I hope everyone else did. Again, appreciation to School Force, and encourage everybody to donate. The Sequoia, we met with them today in a 2x2, and we'll debrief later for that. And then we just recently celebrated Martin Luther King Day. Black History Month is coming up, and I want to remind people that there's an excellent resource in the area, the Diane Hoskins Black History Museum, that is founded and run by a citizen of Belmont. And it is one of the more remarkable things in the area. I encourage everybody to go. Oftentimes they set up in Redwood City for the month of February. And if you have a chance, please go.
Thank you, Dr. Howard. Mr. Leinbach.
Well, I think some of my comments have been spoken about too. I was going to pat myself on the back for School Board Appreciation Month. As you can see, we have a huge group of supporters out here. But actually, it's kind of unfortunate that we need this appreciation. The state legislature voted this in last year, as a statewide appreciation, and it's due to the sometimes disruptive and violent actions at school board meetings in other parts of the state and around the country. But I feel very fortunate that we live in a district and I want with very civil discourse on policy and opinions. And I wanted to reciprocate and just thank our families, our community, and our staff for supporting the school board as they do. So appreciate them and appreciate everyone that I work with as well.
Yeah.
And also with Martin Luther King Jr., Dr. King Day. Many of us appreciate a 4-day week, but we should remember what that holiday is for and the remembrance for it. And of course, Dr. King gave literally everything and sacrificed everything for the struggle for civil rights and in a peaceful manner, which we don't see many people protesting in a peaceful manner these days. My mother actually marched with Dr. King over 50 years ago in Washington, D.C. But his work is not done. We need to continue. We need to remember his sacrifice, and we need to continue that work to make sure there's equality for all groups that are marginalized in our country. So with that, I'll turn it.
Thank you, Mr. Leinbach. For myself, not very much to report. Participated in the 2x2 with Sequoia Union with Superintendent Ibarra and Trustee Howard earlier today, which we will debrief later. I've also been fortunate to participate in the Prop 28 Arts Funding Committee led by Assistant Superintendent Hu. So there was also a meeting of that, which we'll also be discussing later on. And that's about it. Happy New Year and glad to be back at school and glad to have the kids back at school.
Great.
Thank you.
So I will start by wishing everybody a Happy New Year again. And I'll piggyback on the school board appreciation. It goes without saying, we have an amazing board and leadership team. It's hard to put it into perspective when everything's going really smoothly, right? We have members of our board that led us through the pandemic. And new members that came on even after seeing board members lead through the pandemic, right? So you're there through the thick and the thin, and sometimes it's rougher than others. But day in and day out, I know that you guys always really lead with your heart, with the kids first. And from a superintendent's perspective, it's easy to work with a board when there's harmony, when there's civil discourse. We can agree, we can disagree, we can share our opinions. In the end, we lead as a team, as a single board, and that there's a lot to be said for that. So thank you all. And then finally, I'll just mention, reading power. I hear there's a video coming out probably in the next few days. Mr. McGee, it's a camping spree with Mr. McGee. It's read at Camp Read a Lot, and there's a pretty cool dog in it with the superintendent. So
Can't wait to see that.
Thank you, Superintendent Ibarra. All right, item number 11 on the agenda is the mid-year local control accountability plan, LCAP update. And for this, Assistant Superintendent Ching-Pei Hu will be presenting to us.
Okay, how's it going?
Yeah.
All right, so it's just my 2 items today, right? So I'm gonna try and go quickly and get you all home in time for dinner with your families. Can you set it to slideshow mode, please? We're gonna talk a little bit about where we are in our LCAP now that we're about midway through. This is a relatively new requirement from the state that we present to you before February 20th, what's happened, right? So what we're going to be looking at is specifically our current expenditures in the area of our LCF supplemental and concentration funds. We do not receive any concentration funds. We have approximately 15.5% of our kids for our unduplicated pupils. It kind of depends on when in the year you look. So I don't know the exact number that that went into this year's budget, because I've started looking at this current year's numbers and I've already forgotten last year's. We have budgeted 1.19-ish. With a little bit, the exact numbers there. And we have so far encumbered or expended 664,000, almost 600, just over $664,000. So halfway through the year, halfway through the expenditures, this is what we would expect. We are utilizing our dollars as we are planning. Remember, each individual site goes through a planning process with their site councils throughout the year. These goals that you read in the December SIPSA plans are the individual discrete action items that end up in the LCAP. So what I've gone through is giving you a quick summary by site of where we are, what their overall budget was at the beginning of the year, how much they have spent. There are some actions that are completely fully implemented already, and there are some that are in process. Some of the sites have in the mid-year decided to discontinue action items based off of the needs of the students and where their current data are. And if that's the case, then I have indicated it there. Each of these are the individual action items as they translate to the LCAP. You'll remember reading that 100-page document. Under each of the goals, every school site has an action item. As you read through, might go, wait a minute, 174 reading specialist increase sounds a lot like 153, for example. It's because as we add over 3 years' time, in year one, we plan for something. In year two, the school might decide to stop doing that. And then in year three, they've brought something similar back, but different enough that it's a new action item. So sometimes the action items are kind of jump around because we did all of the 2021, 2022 items by site are all clumped together. And then as school sites add items for 22, 23 or 23, 24, they go to the bottom of the list. But that's basically what it is. The first digit is the goal that it comes from, and the second digit is the actual action item. Goal number one, remember, is our basic conditions of learning. Goal number two is culture and climate, and goal number three is engagement. You can see that they are all about 25% expended, encumbered. If we look at the individual school sites, Cipriani's had $58,000 budgeted and $16,000 spent. Fox had $39,000 budgeted and $20,000 spent. So thankfully, the average, they're up above their 25%. They're at about 50. Nesbitt has $205,000 budgeted and $114,000 spent thus far. Ralston has $67,000 budgeted, $22,000 not spent thus far, and they are choosing not to fund a couple of items. One of them has to do with professional development, and it's not that they're not funding the action item, they are utilizing a different dollar source, and so therefore it will not be funded through LCF supplemental dollars, but the action item is still happening. So when we see the end of year report, it will have a $0 item amount next to it and a narrative that explains that they use school force dollars instead. Redwood Shores had $73,000 budgeted and $15,000 encumbered thus far. Remember that both Cipriani and Redwood Shores have new principals that are implementing previous principals' plans. And so they've got the things purchased that were purchased early, and they're working through all the different action items, and they are working with their staff to refine the action items. So my guess is they will have a lower percentage of expenditure come the end of the year, simply because they're still adjusting to someone else's plan and what their staff is telling them they want. Sandpiper has $109,000 budgeted and has spent almost $30,000. Same thing with them. They have one action item that they're not implementing. It says 1.68 professional development. You guys can see it in your actual slides on your screen. It is encompassed within 1.65, which has to do with release time. So they are providing professional development and I don't think it says professional development. It says professional collaboration. And so in 1.65 is release time for teams to work together to look at data, analyze student work, and make collaborative plans. If we think about our metrics and how we are doing on all of our goals, in goal one, There are a couple of metrics where we have data at this point in the year. The vast majority of our data have to do with student performance data. It is early January. I mean, at least when we created the slides. Our mid-year testing window is January 9th through February 2nd. So at the end of next month, we could be able to give, but we were a little nervous that we wanted to get it done early rather than a little bit late. We didn't want things to get busy and then the meeting gets to be too big. We do have 201 teachers in our district right now holding full credentials. 3 are working under intern credentials and 2 teachers are working on a content waiver. Our goal is always to have 100% of our staff working within their content area. This is a fairly good percentage, especially when we think about the massive teacher shortage we are experiencing across the state. 100% of our classrooms have Common Core aligned curriculum, K-8, in all content areas. We have updated all of our adoptions that are available. We are wanting new math and ELA, but the frameworks aren't. The frameworks are ready for math, but there's no curriculum yet to adopt and pilot. And then ELA has been pushed back a little bit. So it will be a couple more years before we purchase any new curriculum. And then for, like I was saying, for local benchmarks, we don't have mid-year data until early February. Goals 2 and 3 have to do with our culture and climate and our engagement. So we have stipulated our metrics to be mostly youth truth data, California Healthy Kids data, suspension data. These are all collected at the end of the year. And so while we will be administering California Healthy Kids in the spring, we don't have data now. We have our suspension data that's incomplete at the moment because we're only partway through the year. And then our youth truth data window, the survey window opens at the end of this month. It's January 31st to February 22nd. So we will not have data on that until March or April. So that's why there's no metric for you for these specific goals. Questions about where we are in our mid-year LCAP expenditures?
Thank you, Assistant Superintendent Hu. I'd like to start with Trustee Bruno, if you'd like, or we can pass to someone else and come back to you.
Yes.
Sounds good. That is totally fine. Trustee Howard.
What, so I understand that we moved into being a solidly community funded district. What happens to the LCFF supplemental grant funding that is consistent?
Do you want to answer that or do you want me to?
We can tag team. Do you want to start and then I'll chime in?
So we either get community funds or we get LCF. So if we are solidly in and not switching for the 24-25 year, we will not get supplemental dollars.
That said, the overall fact remains true, which is that whichever one we're in, that is the higher, right? So if we're quote unquote not getting it, it means if we were to get it, we would have less. I would say for LCAP planning services for purposes, we would probably all agree that just because we're on a different funding formula doesn't mean that we shouldn't be budgeting to serve our unduplicated students. So I think from an LCAP perspective, we would still allocate that to supplemental and concentration spending.
And we would still report out and we would still require our principals hold stakeholder committee meetings to make decisions about how to utilize the local dollars. So whether they're truly local dollars from a community funded tax base or from the state, it's all public dollars. And so functionally speaking, it doesn't change anything. We are like from a compliance standpoint, we are still required to create an LCAP. It just instead of supplemental dollars, we'll say local dollars.
Does that come out of the general fund then?
It's always out of the general fund. Supplemental is also part of the general fund.
So supplements through the LCFF, we're in that, and it goes into our general fund, and then we decide how we're going to spend it through our LCAP. And therefore, we just come through a different window.
Correct.
Okay.
Any other questions, Trustee Howard? Trustee Leinbach?
No questions. It was a good presentation. Thank you.
Trustee Koss.
So thank you for answering about the funding source. So when teachers, one thing that when you said that some of the things were not funded and then you said, well, they're just choosing a different funding source, right? So what would the rationale be for them to choose a different funding source?
Lots of different reasons. I mean, some of it is how well it aligns to what School First is funding within their school plan in terms of professional development. Remember, every school site gets a solid chunk of dollars from School First professional development. The school force professional development dollars tend to be a little bit less restrictive. Principals are able to make more flexible choices with how to spend the money. So that's probably the largest factor in leading a principal to say, I want to utilize school force to pay for this professional development. That also then opens up a chunk of budget. I don't exactly know because I haven't checked in with every single one about their differences. We just had our meeting yesterday where I reminded them, okay, well, you've told me what you've spent. You've told me where you're at and what you're not doing. For the remainder of the year, you have to figure out, it's our responsibility to spend the LCF dollars on this year's kids. For the remainder of the year, you need to think about how you want to do what you want to do with those extra dollars. So it's very possible, I just haven't had the touch point with Mrs. Adler yet, that she's moving something off LCF, paying for it out of school force so that she can combine dollars to support something else on her site.
So that, okay, so feeding in that was my part two was, you know, nice for them to be sensitive to the money aspect, but it's kind of like, well, you have it budgeted, so like, shouldn't it be used?
Yeah, it should be used. The other component to LCF dollars, when we're talking supplemental dollars, is the money is to be principally directed towards our unduplicated pupils. So sometimes they're doing true school-wide programs, and so it's not meeting the letter of the law or the intent of the law, and so that they choose to use school force dollars instead, or a PTA grant or another funding source, so that they can think about, how do I create a different action item that will be principally directed towards our unduplicated pupil count of ELs, foster youth, or low socioeconomic status.
So with you said there was maybe some restrictions, or it was a little bit restrictive, so the restrictions are being placed by us as the district or the state as per some of their requirements? And can you give an example of restrictive versus like?
It's a state requirement that all of our supplemental dollars, Ruby and I go through, and after the principals tell us how they want to spend their dollars, we go through with a calculation and we look through how many of these items are actually principally directed towards our unduplicated pupil count, how many of these items are generally improving the situation for all kids, and therefore the rising tide lifts all boats. And we have a calculation and a percentage. So we, from the state, from a compliance standpoint, are trying to maximize dollars spent on unduplicated pupils. And so we want to try and minimize the whole school, everyone activities.
Okay.
So that's some adjustment that happens during the year, right? Like with all the best laid plans, your kids show up different than who you plan for. Your needs change throughout the year. And so principals adjust. And they have flexibility to do so. The principally directed requirement is a state requirement.
Okay. Last question, can you remind me goal number one? I didn't catch.
As general, it's our core instructional program. So ensuring that we have access to core materials, professional development for teachers, and we have a strong kind of first best instruction. Really targeting, focusing in on closing the gap and noticing growth and gains. That was the tweak that we made in the 17 from between 17 to 20 and then from to 21-24. We revised and refined to really focus in on identifying the kids that need the most support.
Thank you.
Trustee Bruno.
What controls the difference in the numbers, the amount budgeted by site?
The amount budgeted by site is dependent on the number of unduplicated pupils they have. These are supplemental dollars. There is a per pupil count. So you'll see that Nesbitt has $205,000 of LCF dollars. That's because they have the highest percentage of unduplicated pupils, highest number, absolute number of unduplicated pupils.
And Redwood Shores is next, and then we're also like I guess just as simple as that.
It is as simple as that. You can see who has the highest number of unduplicated pupils to the least just by ranking their budgets.
Yeah, 5%. Yeah.
South Bay is a lot, yeah. So yes, yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Assistant Superintendent Hu. Great presentation, great questions from my fellow board members. I think mostly any questions I had have also been answered. If you could just remind us, please, how does each school decide how to use supplemental funds?
It's a year-long process that typically what ends up happening in August, September, October is we review what we thought we were going to do from the previous year. We finalize the plan, so it gets submitted to the board for board approval. And then we spend January through June not only expending all of the extra dollars, but also in our site council meetings, that's the feedback loop that, you know, we want people participating in, and that's really our LCAP advisory groups. Our principals work with the communities to say, here are the district's goals, here's how they align to our school goals, here are the actions we've said we were gonna do, here's the data that we have, let's decide if this makes sense or not, and let's together tweak what we're gonna do. So January to May, we're collecting 20 data from this school year, planning forward for next year. So by the end of May, they give me all of their proposed actions that get worked into our LCAP that's approved at the end of June, middle of June.
Great, thank you. That was it for questions. Any further questions? Great. Thank you, Ms. Hu.
Thanks.
Thank you. And then
Yeah,
you're our next,
again.
presenting our next agenda item as well.
So more money expenditures, lots of fun.
So yes,
Spend money.
so
Apparently Sacramento agrees.
the next item is item number 12, Ed Services, Prop 28 update, and Ms. Hu is providing that as an information item to us.
So we have been meeting as a stakeholder group to think about how we want to spend our Prop 28 dollars. One of the important pieces to know is that we don't actually know the dollar amount yet, and we also don't know when that money is going to land in our coffers. So being a responsible body, we don't spend money before we get it. So this year we have created a stakeholder committee to work together to determine how we want to spend the money in next school year once the money lands. What is Prop 28? Prop 28 is a ballot measure that was approved by the voters of the state of California in November of 2022. This means that it cannot be removed without another ballot measure to negate it. So the funding will always be there. The dollar amount that we get per pupil is dependent on the state budget. So there's a little bit of all of that in limbo. The goal of Prop 28 is to provide our districts with the money to establish new and ongoing programs to support arts instruction in our schools. It's supposed to start in 23-24, but like I said, we don't have money yet. We don't have a deep bank to say we're gonna spend it and then hopefully the state reimburses us. So we have zero expenditures this year related to Prop 28. Makes sense. The goal is to really help all schools. We're lucky. We have school force, we have PTA, we have amazing supports. We have an arts and music program. There are schools and school districts in the state of California that don't. So this money is really intended to help create a baseline and ensure that all kids have access to art during the school day. And that's not a supplemental after school, before school kind of activity. The estimate is that we are going to get $112 per student, which equates to about $450,000 for our school district. What's considered arts instruction? In our first stakeholder group meeting in November, we reviewed the VAPA standards. That's visual and performing arts. There are 5 different disciplines: dance, media arts, music, theater, and visual arts, underneath which are lots of different disciplines and lots of different options. So we spent our time as a stakeholder group first understanding what the VAPA standards are and what our responsibility is for providing instruction in these 4 disciplinary areas. Then we also learned about how our funds can be allocated. Of the $450,000, 80% must be spent on staffing. So they have to be hired through the district. They can be certificated, they can be classified, they can be teachers providing direct services to students, they can be a district office personnel coordinator who's doing all of the management, it could be a classified person doing materials management. There's lots of different options, but they have to be district employees getting benefits. 19% of the money can be used for instructional materials, supplies, and equipment. And the kind of bucket that this encompasses is any contractor. So if we think about what we currently have in existence, the LEAP Arts contract, that's not true, because that comes through our budget. The PTA funded music classes are currently contracted and vendored. That would fall under the arts education partnerships. So up to 20%, so $90,000 can be used for that. I say 20, even though that says 19, because up to 1% may be used for administration. We're just lumping that into the materials. 80% for staff, salaried staff, 20% for materials and potential partnerships. The other rule from Prop 28 is that the dollars are meant to supplement and not supplant. They utilized our base program that existed in 21-22 to determine what is in existence. The new dollars that we receive are not supposed to fund anything that was already in existence back then. So just to give you kind of a picture of what we had in existence that passed through our budget, that's counted as baseline. School Force provides support for elementary and middle school music at an amount of $380,000. They fund a LEAP art contract for $120,000. And they also fund additional art, music, and drama programs through grants totaling $20,000. So if you just add that up, in your quick math, you'll realize that currently School Force pays more than what we're going to be getting from the grant. So it's great to get money. We can do some good, but we're not going to be able to do a huge amount, right? It just is what it is. Oops, I didn't update the slide, sorry. So we surveyed the community. We continue to remind people to participate in the survey all the way up until last week. We had our very first committee meeting in November where we reviewed the standards. We understood the purpose of our committee and we talked about the regulations. Then we reminded people to keep participating in the survey. At our December meeting, we had about 200 respondents at the time. We reviewed the data, the team helped look through the trends, look through what people were wanting to do with the money, what was kind of rising to the top. Between then and our meeting yesterday in January, we did send out more reminders, but we did also add Spanish translation to all of the questions and answers. And so we ended up with 401 participants, which is more than I've ever gotten on any LCAP survey, even in the world of like when we were doing everything digitally, and I thought 250 was such a high number. So we had really good data. What was interesting, the group went through the same process. They looked through all of the comments. They looked through the numerical data. Mrs. Adler did a little slide presentation about the numbers. Our team looked at the narrative comments, all of the anecdotal pieces. There are two things that are basically rising to the top. One, people want more frequency of music and art. They like the programs that we have. They feel like the programs that we have are quality, but they would like more staff to teach, and they want things to happen more regularly. The other piece that we told people about, if you cared about nothing of the other stuff, at least tell us this. Would you rather us spend our dollars on something brand new or spend our money expanding what we already have? And despite doubling the numbers, the percentage basically stayed the same. We have 67% of folks saying they want us to put more money into what we already have. So those are the marching orders that we have, right? So yesterday, the group that our stakeholder group, like I said, I don't think I shared with you, but our stakeholder group does have representatives from parents, staff, and it has members from every single school site. We've got special ed, general ed, we've got music specialists participating. We've got a pretty diverse group and it just worked beautifully. They each broke up into 4 groups. They looked through the data and they came up with their own brainstorm of what they think we should do with the money. So the next step is for staff. Me, Sabrina, and Talia together are kind of the staff on the committee. We'll review all of the options people have put out. We will assign dollar items to it because we know how much things cost. We know the logistics. We will then come back together in February to look at the cost of all of their options and map it back onto our strategic plan so that it is in alignment with our 4 goals. So that's kind of where we are. We're hoping to have everything decided together at our next meeting in February. I'm meeting with them February 13th so that we can come to you on March 7th and make a recommendation. Yeah. That was just a snapshot with the data, but I didn't actually want to talk about it because it's not current data. So just pretend those slides weren't there. Any questions?
Thank you, Ms. Hu. Trustee Leinbach, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the presentation. This is really interesting. I love getting more arts and performing arts in the schools. We've always been limited on that. I've talked to a lot of parents saying, why aren't we doing more music programs and everything? So getting that extra money to help out is great. So given that we don't know how much funds we're going to get, and we can't budget it, of course, for now, is there limitations, I mean, let's say, June 1st, we said, oh, we got all this money. What's the limitations on, we always would like to use it in the same year, but it's too late. What's the limitation on when we can use that money?
We don't have audit guidelines yet. I presume they'll come out when the dollars get told to us.
Yeah, there is usually some carryover ability. And so I don't think it will be fully restricted within that year. It's probably, I would guess, going to be in the within 2, maybe 3 years, similar to ELOP.
Okay.
The reason that we don't exactly know is because the language of the proposition that was passed was that it's a 1% increase on the Prop 98 guarantee, and Prop 98 is driven by lots of different, there's 3 tests for Prop 98. So 1% of Prop 98 is a complicated calculation.
So the other reality of it is, if we don't have dollar amounts and we're not fully budgeted, we will not bring the plan to you in March. We just wanted to be ready in terms of understanding priorities and choices so that staff could, in a tight timeline, make a decision, because as soon as we know how much money we have, we want to be able to get approval to post jobs, because as we had talked about kind of casually in previous months, the entire state of California has this pot of money available to them. They will be vying for the same credentialed and even classified staff to do these jobs, right? So if we can get out and ahead of others, because we have our plan in place, we will hopefully be in a better boat for recruiting.
And we have a choice of either hiring or taking existing staff and giving them additional training, get those credentials to.
That's a possibility, yes.
Let's see. And going back to the supplement versus supplant. So you gave the example where school force is giving like $520,000 for the programs you mentioned. And aside from Prop 28, either school force could fund that, or we could take it out of the general fund. In this case, school force is funding it. As far as the new money, the $450 that's coming in, my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that the $520 that's there, that stays there, whether it comes out of the general fund or school force, it's already existing in the district's budget, so it stays there. And the $450 would be on top of that, correct?
It is supposed to. Now, in order for that 520 to stay there, we need our community to keep giving to school force and keep fundraising, because if the bottom falls out on school force, it's not like the individuals running a school force have deep pockets to say, oh, here's the $500,000 that we didn't collect from fundraising, right? So
yeah, but
in intent, that's supposed to stay, and the 450 should be above and beyond. If school force is not able to fund that, and that's a reality, that's a piece that Rui and I have been trying to figure out what the state wants, what's going to happen from the state in that respect, because that's not really our dollars. It's local dollars that pass through us, and we don't yet know what's allowable with that.
So school force is a fantastic organization, and our community is fantastic for,
I have faith that that's not going to be a problem.
Yes. So hypothetically, we're speaking, of course, disclaimer out.
Yes.
So if for some reason that 450 or 520, the 520 would shrink, then we'd have to, if we want to keep those programs, we'd have to fund it out of the general fund. Or we could say, well, we're not doing these programs. But if we do that, then the 450 from Prop 28 could not be used for that, because it has to be on top of that, right?
I think it's a semantics issue, right? If the funding isn't there, we want to keep our base program, and we want to add to it.
Absolutely.
But if the funding disappears, then the program will get cut and the base program won't exist until we bring those monies in to fill in the hole. And maybe what ends up happening is our program looks exactly the same, but it's preventing us from making a cut.
And we could use that 450 for those programs?
This is where I
different of the audit guidelines, which haven't been released yet. And so particularly when something is covered by a different form of restricted funding, that's where you want to look really closely to the audit guidelines. Our last update was about a month and a half ago, when they said we'll release more information about the audit, which was just a FAQ question that said, we know everyone wants to look for wants the audit guidelines, they're forthcoming. So that was a really exciting update. To the level of detail that CBOs everywhere were looking for. But I think the other thing to keep in mind is, prior to voters passing Prop 98, the state independently had identified arts and music as a priority, and they released the Arts and Music Instructional Block Grant, which was we received a little bit under $1 million for that, and it was a one-time fund. But we have yet to come up with a plan for that because of Prop 28. And so I think we do have a little bit of buffer there. If Prop 28 comes a little short, we essentially have had this previous one-time grant from the state meant for this that I think we can use to cover any differences between our budgeted revenue for that and our, I don't think we're not in a position where it's like, oh my gosh, if we're short by $20,000, we're going to have to cut some other program.
We are strategically planning based off of using the most restrictive dollars first.
All right, well, everyone loves a good cliffhangers. Well, I have full faith and confidence that whenever these audit guidelines and the actual dollar numbers come out, you guys are going to figure out the best way to allocate it. And the committee, who is ever on that, I appreciate everyone doing their volunteer work on giving that feedback, so we know really what the community wants and we can move in that direction. So I look forward to seeing the results from the task force whenever they're available. I think, what is that, a March item?
The goal is March.
Okay, so look forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Excuse me. Trustee Costs?
So thank you for asking the question. I had the exact same question about the funding, if that would disappear or if school force would reallocate it in the future to different needs, given however much is fundraised. I have a question for you. What happens to districts first of all, was this a state thing, this supplement, not supplant? Because the voters just voted to have funds for an art program. So who put the stipulation in about?
I believe it was in the ballot language.
Okay.
It was meant to.
Okay, so I guess my question is what, if we kind of in theory think of ourselves as it's coming from our foundation, so if it didn't, maybe we wouldn't even be having a music program. What happens to the districts without programs? Like without music programs already in place, do they get?
Everything is supplemented, right?
Okay.
So
So
the way that the ballot language says is you get an extra 1% for programs that are meant to supplement whatever you currently have, not supplanted. And so for a district, so everyone gets these funds.
Okay.
It's just a question of what you spend it on and what that qualifies as. So if you have a baseline of offering no programs, you can spend your 1% to do everything. If you had a baseline of maybe having some programs but on existing funds, then there's a question of, is it supplementing, not supplanting, if you're replacing a program that was going to go away?
Okay.
But that's a separate question from whether or not you get the funds. The voter said everyone gets this 1%.
Okay, so all districts will get funds.
That's correct.
Okay. So going back to the program offerings, I took the survey and it was neat to see all these different offerings like dance and everything. And I was like, oh, dance, that's an interesting, or media arts. So what can you, broadly speaking, if you don't have the specifics, what offerings as a district do we have? I certainly know kind of what Nesbit might have. I'm not, so I'm just curious. I mean, is there dance going on in one of our school sites? Like, I guess if it's on the choice list, maybe.
So the choice list was a little bit broad on purpose because I wanted people to not think about what do we have, because if we only know about what we know, my brainstorm isn't going to be so fruitful, right? So we looked through guidance from the state on all the 5 disciplines and what are some different ideas that fall under each. I think I gave 17 different categories and asked people to rank from 1 to 10. 1 being this shouldn't be taught at school. Not that it's not important, it just shouldn't happen during the school day. To 10 being every child should learn about this before they leave. We put them all in order, and when we aggregate it, the average scores ranged from 4.7 to 8.6-ish between all 17 items. So there's no way we can do all 17 of those at all grade level on $450,000. It is interesting to see just, some of the higher rankings that had the higher points in total and in kind of average also had the widest span of having 9s and 10s and 1s and 2s. And some of the ones in the 4s and 5s were consistently 4s and 5s. So looking through all of that information, looking through the comments that were made, it is clear that the community wants us to invest in what we have. At Ralston, we do have drama classes as electives. We have culinary arts, we have digital media arts, we have animation, we have ceramics, we have traditional art. We have all of the music ensembles. At Sandpiper and Nesbit, the teachers do electives that fall into each of the VAPA categories as well. We do music at Nesbit as a once a week during Thursday, because that's what the school had asked for in terms of middle school. And Sandpiper asked for their instrumental music for the middle schools as an extra to happen before school.
Mhm.
So that's their choice. 3, 4, 5 all has general music, and then 4, 5 has the option to take instrumental on top of that. And then what differs is what happens at TK2. Each of the school sites have PTA funds that they're allocating. Some are doing additional music classes TK2, some are doing dance and movement classes TK2, and then all kids elementary K5 get LEAP art. So we do have visual arts and music. We don't necessarily have all of the other components built out all the way through. But the VAPA standards are for 7 through, they're for K through 12, but a lot of those very specific pieces are taught through electives in the 6 through 12 realm.
That's very helpful. Because one thing that, as a parent, that TK, you mentioned the partnership, and I noticed that percentage, and I think that school sites, especially I've heard anecdotally, certainly Nesbit has really embraced and really welcomed that enrichment for TK through second that's being provided through PTA funds.
Yeah.
As a parent sitting in, it's been a really wonderful program that they put on through the vendor. And so that, that would be nice to still, within this framework, of course, give them maybe that flexibility. I'm just wondering how much PTA funded outside of Nesbit. Is there a lot of, do you know of it?
The PTA funds are between 7 and 19 per site. So if we average that out and say it's $12,000 times 7, that's $84,000, right? 12 times 7. Yeah, I mean, so in theory, the 20% of our 450 could go to paying for those existing contracts in a way that is in alignment with the materials and then helps free up PTA budgets. That's one option, right? So I'm looking forward to diving into the different brainstorms to see what people came up with, because I certainly have ideas, but this is about the community dollars and what does the community want. So
Great, thank you. Thank you.
We'll share out what the options are after we've teased out what's actually feasible. Because we did ask for pie in the sky, because I think even pie in the sky, even if it's completely unaffordable, there are going to be elements in pie in the sky that we can create in an economically feasible fashion.
Hey, I'm going to just take a moment to kind of piggyback to when we think of the big picture and the big pot. There's lots of budget pieces across the board. I like to always think of budget, like, don't think about funding source. Do we have what we need to provide what we want for our kids? And once we establish that base program of what we want for our kids, we figure out how to fund it.
Yeah.
Right. So, one of the great things about the Education Commitment Campaign is it thinks big. It thinks much bigger than a local school of things that benefit all of our kids district wide. And it funds those things so that local PTAs don't need to try and connect all those dots, right? So when we're thinking about the arts dollars, when we're thinking about school force dollars and PTA dollars, we really benefit when we think of the big picture, right? And all that piece. I know with the work of the ECC and school force does like to fund those things that are common across the district, so that each of our students, regardless of which school they go to, have a comprehensive experience, right? Whether that's in arts, music, dance, whatever. It's very similar, if not the same, across the board.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yes. Trustee Bruno, do you have any questions?
I do. This is maybe really simple or not. What's the definition of currently? Like, if we could build upon current offered programs, is that something that like could we put something in place that we wanted to use it for, to like, if we agreed that our programs, like you said, in the survey, there's something that we don't actually offer.
In terms of supplement versus supplant, or,
If the Prop $38 is built on current offer
Yeah.
programs.
yeah,
Like, is it like something that must be already that you already had been offering, or can you create something? And then.
oh, it could be current or new, right? So it could be taking and adding on to what we have. Or it could be something totally different and we just leave music and art exactly as it is. And we say, let's take the $450,000 and dump it entirely into drama.
Yeah,
Like we have flexibility from what we can read, but we don't have the audit guidelines. So there's this piece of, we need the audit guidelines to really make sure that what our community comes up with
yeah,
is in compliance.
yeah. So I gotta,
Yes, from my understanding, the other piece in terms of supplement versus supplant, the current is based off of the 21-22 school year. 21-22 school year is the baseline of what exists.
so
So our numbers have gone up since then.
Yeah.
But we're counting against 21-22.
So my question is like, if we have this long list that we surveyed from, and then I look at the list right now, like School Force gives us music support and leap art and drum support. And if we, in the committee, as you're looking at the survey feedback, you realize that there's other things that maybe are priorities. Should we actually grow that list before we get a dollar amounts and audit list so that we can then supplement those programs that we don't actually offer?
It's gonna all depend on the audit.
Does that make
Yeah, there's not kind of, there. So I'll give a couple examples of how it could be defined, right? Because so the intent behind supplement, not supplant, is you should be doing something that you literally wouldn't do if this funding didn't exist. And so
Okay,
you could see one definition of it's just saying, give us proof that you wouldn't be doing this without this funding, which could.
okay, I maybe I understood it differently. You're saying the money is to actually create new things.
No, well,
New could be more in the same category. Like new could be, we have an existing music program for 3, 4, 5 when we have 3 teachers. But if we hire another teacher, it's the same program, but that new FTE is new. So I'm expanding an existing.
right, so we could say we wouldn't have this new we wouldn't have this additional teacher
Yep.
if not for this funding.
Mhm.
So you could see them defining it one way, for instance, by saying, give us proof that without this funding, you wouldn't have this, which could be an affidavit from the board that says, yes, we were planning on cutting this program if this didn't come along, right? You could see one definition saying, we're literally just gonna look at the dollars that you coded to function, 1103, which is music, and you are expected to spend $400,000 more than that. Right, which would create a very different way, because we're like, oh gosh, well, what if we coded something to dance? Right? So how we get ahead, that's why so much depends on the audit guidelines, because while we understand the fundamental principle, which is the intent that you should do something you wouldn't have done without it, without the audit guidelines, it's impossible to know how that's going to get defined.
Thank you.
Good question.
Trustee Howard, do you have any questions?
Yeah, so 80% of the funding should go to staff. Does that mean internal staff, or can it also include contractors?
It must be internal BRSSD staff. They specifically stipulated that contractors fall under that 20%. Arts partnerships.
Yeah, but some of our programs are through contractors. And so if we're talking about expanding current programs, then we're sort of limited to those, limiting those programs to what's already funded through contractors, especially the PTA funded program. Is that correct?
PTA doesn't go through our general budget, so the
Got it.
PTA is a little bit free. But yes, Leap Arts is, for example, something that is part of our baseline, but we are limited, we couldn't really expand that beyond $90,000 because we can only spend 20% on contractors.
And if my math's right, about 80% is 360,000 of 450.
Yeah.
I was thinking.
Yeah.
So that's about 2 FTEs if we divide it 180. But that doesn't have to be 2 FTEs. It could be,
4.5.
yeah. Okay.
And it doesn't have to be certificated staff. It could be classified staff
See.
in some way, shape, or form. I mean, it makes it a little bit different, right? Classified staff, we could hire classified staff to lead certain things, but then we're limited on, if we were to hire certificated staff, we could also increase prep time for teachers. But then there's also that balance of how much instructional time are we carving out of their day by providing too many extras? That has come up from our staff who are part of the stakeholder group. They want to be very careful that they're not losing more instructional time.
Correct.
Even though it's for something that's complementary and instructional,
not just complementary and instructional, but can something be emphasize a part of the curriculum that is somewhat limited if you are not an arts teacher. So, for instance, when we talk about arts and say global studies, we have oftentimes relied on docents that were sort of freebies and also very low quality and commitment. You're saying that we could possibly shore that up.
we could possibly hire an art teacher who comes in and does specific lessons that are tailored to and integrated with what they're learning in history class.
Got it. Does this money roll over from year to year, or the funding? So if you don't spend it all one year, can you roll it over into the next year and then adjust how you're going to spend it? Or is it spend it all, this is what you got to spend this year, you spend it all this year, or
Depends on the guidelines. My guess is probably the same guess as Marie's. Every other federal dollar, state dollar we get, you can carry over from year 1 to year 2. Usually, I haven't seen money last longer than 3 years.
All right, actually,
My point
3
being-
fiscal years.
3 fiscal years?
Yeah.
So we could start small with some programs and experiment a little bit about what's working, what's not working, and then expand more
Yes,
assertively as
Yes.
the programs grow.
yes. You could hedge your bets a little too if we think that we're gonna have, I don't know, if our enrollment will be different, right?
Now,
Set a lesser percentage this year and then more next year.
that School of Rock program. Just, I'm done.
But Jack Black too.
School of Rock or Schoolhouse Rocks?
Why not both?
All right, I'm done.
Thank you. Thank you, Assistant Superintendent Hu. I am on the committee. Thank you for convening the committee. I am an appreciator of art, not an artist or musician myself. So it's been a great experience with staff and parents and community members. And thanks to all the community for who responded to the survey. Just a couple of questions. I'm thinking I remember this. Did you say that there is going to be a survey for students?
There will be a survey for students. We will get that out in the next month so that we have that information before our February 13th meeting.
Okay, great. Thank you. And that will it be similar to the one that parents and staff?
It will be somewhat similar, but probably a little bit simpler.
Okay.
Like, what do you like? What don't you like? Which of these would you like to see more of?
Sure. Sounds good. Great. Thank you. And then as my colleagues have mentioned, you can have 80% has to be for staff, but you're saying that it could be classified staff. So just theoretically, say you had a person who is not a credentialed dance teacher, but they are a dance teacher professionally. That's what they do. Could the district hire them as a classified employee?
I think so. I mean, we do different PSAs. What would not be allowed to happen is that this person has the kids without teacher supervision, but yes.
Okay.
You have to create a job description.
Okay.
There's-
Job description.
You just have.
There's logistics to it, but possible.
No, we don't.
Are you volunteering to come teach?
Only if
It'd be a benefit.
it's.
Yeah.
And as part of the governor's budget, one of the things that Dan and I heard about in Sacramento was a desire to help folks of that profile, professional artists be able to quickly and easily get a credential. So
Yeah, there's it's called a CTE, Credential Career Technical Education, that allows folks who have been in the field an opportunity to get certification in that field without having to do all of the coursework that it takes to do a full credential. So it's a specialized credential.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think that's it. And thank you for clarifying that. As you said, if we find out from the state and the committee has done their job too, if we're able to go forward in March and post job openings, it might be helpful to have that flexibility of you don't necessarily have to have your credential, that we could work with you on getting your CTE certification, or potentially just if they're a professional artist, come in.
Well, I mean, lots of options. We'll know a little bit more once we get on it. So hopefully I'll have something for you in March.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Hu.
Anytime.
Oh, sorry.
Does the funding, because it's supplement, not supplant, does the funding that we've already committed to arts then become somewhat restricted? Are you now then committed to that level of funding year in and year out? Or for instance, if we were LCSF suddenly, in theory, but there was a big pullback on the governor's budget, how do we maneuver through that kind of, well, you had been spending this and therefore you have to continue to supplement, not supplement?
I turn to my CBO.
If I'm understanding the question correctly, it sounds like there's two parts.
Yeah.
One is about how do you continue to supplement and not supplant? And the answer to that is there's just one baseline year. So you're not expected to supplement, not supplant year on year, because that would be an escalating cost. So the baseline year is 21-22. We are expected to supplement
From that.
off of that baseline. But then in 24-25, we are not expected to supplement over.
What you did on the
23,
baseline.
Right, exactly. So because it's just a 1% ongoing, right? So it'd be very impractical to expect us to keep supplementing year on year on year, because the next thing you know, that'll take over the entire school day. I think the second question was, what is the impact of our funding status on the amount of funding we receive?
If the state budget is impacted in a negative way, what does that do to our flexibility in terms of adjusting our budget?
So the state's budget, the high level answer to that is that it, like all funding, is somewhat tied to, the economic prosperity of the state. And it's a small enough number that for us, because being on the cusp we're insulated from these big downturns, right? So for us, while we are fully exposed to, the risk of our Prop 28 funding going down by 50% if the economy crashes, that's 1% of our total funding. And therefore we'd be able to overcome that, if that makes sense. Like, whereas if we were solidly LCFF, if the state announces a negative COLA, we're 10% down on $50 million. This is 10% down on, $500,000 is a weatherable level of uncertainty.
Okay. I think the other interesting thing is we're not necessarily used to getting money via proposition. So that's something new that we're all looking at. The other piece, the last arts and music block grant funding that came through had arts and music as the tagline, but it had a whole host of other things that it could be spent on, because the legislature didn't account for those things. So they just expanded the uses for that money, right? So that doesn't have that piece. This was voted by voters and it has to be carried out by the state. What we heard yesterday is, the concern for a lot of districts, not us at this point, is the declining enrollment. They're declining at a rate much quicker than COLA will keep up. right? So cost of living can be going up and it could feel like you should be getting more money. But because declining enrollment is going down, you're actually losing more money than you're gaining. So it'll be interesting to see how the state kind of navigates those two tensions of kind of a guaranteed, if you will, and then something flexible over here. What happens if this goes down? Like, what if you needed to reduce that art program?
That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
Trustee Bruno?
Yeah, that's it. Maybe I'm overthinking. I think I know the answer. Are the guidelines? Could you use your 19% for your staff or even partners to cover certificates for them to then use 80%?
I don't think you can, given the few items that are listed there.
Yeah.
But we do have other funds that I oversee and manage that could potentially be allocated towards helping staff get credentials.
Yeah.
Right, we have educator effectiveness dollars that we could potentially reallocate. I mean, they're all planned out, but we could reallocate, and change things up if that's.
Thank you. Any other questions or discussion? Great, thank you, Assistant Superintendent Hu. Thank you. All right, item number 13 is the 2x2 debrief. Earlier today, Trustee Howard, Superintendent DeGuara, and myself met with Sequoia Union High School District Trustee Amy Koo. Carrie Dubois was not able to join us, and we met with Superintendent Crystal Leach. And I'll turn it over to Dan.
Yeah, it was a good conversation, I think. We touched on a few different things. So this was it was an agenda we developed in November, and we had to postpone till today. I talked with the group about our transition to by trustee areas. We talked about our facility master plan process and where we are in that. And the stakeholder engagement we've done. And I provided the committee a glimpse into our learner profile work that we've started. The board will get that, the entire board will get that glimpse at a retreat in a couple of weeks. But just kind of, I'll foreshadow a little bit. We've met several times as a committee for the learner profile. It's actually been a group that's been filling my bucket as a superintendent. Go to it. I got everybody started thinking around this idea. And now I'm really a facilitator of great conversation. It's pretty exciting. I will piggyback. One thing I just want to say, Assistant Superintendent who shared earlier on her committee, on her Prop 28, she has Principal Adler and Ms. Carter, Principal Talia on her committee. On my committee, we have Principal Hanson Vera and Principal Higgins supporting. We're really trying to make sure that we're bringing our principals and having them help us lead this work too. So it's been a really good group. Lots of discussion. I could talk all night on that, but at the end of the day, we've been debating about what are the strongest attributes and how do we create a profile that we recognize and honor the overlap between the attributes and we let it complement each other, right? So right now, the committee is kind of wrestling with the idea of think, innovate, and advocate as our kind of tenets, and then some descriptors of it, but we'll go into detail in that at our retreat. And then with Sequoia, they talked about their strategic plan, their learner profile. They're in the thick of it, doing all their focus groups and working through that. And then they also talked about the work that they've been doing in their curriculum and their alignment, really focusing on yes, maintaining and having accelerated pathways and courses for students, but also looking at that core experience that they're building for their youngest high schools, those ninth graders moving up, really making sure that they're tackling the academic and the social emotional side. Turn over to all right, President Northrop and Trustee Howard.
Thank you, Superintendent DeGuara. That would basically be it. Great meeting. I'm forgetting about like when different surveys are mentioned. Did Superintendent Leach say she was going to share a survey with
Yes.
our middle school staff to help inform their strategic plan? Was it
think it's
middle
our middle
school
schools.
community or the students? But I appreciated that she was offering that survey to some subset of our middle school community to help inform their plan.
Yeah, no, it's always a good meeting. It's always refreshing to hear that you're struggling through similar issues, and always refreshing to hear that we have a lot less drama than other districts.
Great, thank you. Any questions from the other board members?
Was there any discussion about like the articulation for eighth grade students? I mean, do they have any suggestions or any comments about, it's like, oh, when we send our eighth graders up, is there feedback about their preparedness or anything like that?
I think we had, that had been one of our discussion topics earlier in the year. We did not discuss it at this meeting. I think it's probably a topic that comes back.
March 7th is our next meeting, and we'll make note of that. Yeah.
The general feedback has been good though. In other words, that BRSSD students tend to thrive regardless of where they've gone to, which middle school they've gone to. They all seem to do pretty well in comparison to other districts. So, but they also admitted that articulation is one of those conversations they have repeatedly, no matter what district you're talking about. And there's no magic formula, but that we seem to be doing something right. Good feedback.
Hey, I will say there was probably a commonality that I heard her say, like, our families are always worried, are their kids going to be ready for high school? And she expressed, the Sequoia parents, is my kid going to be ready for college? And I think when your kid's in college, I think you're probably saying, oh my gosh, are they going to be ready for the real world? Right? So kind of those common fears, concerns, hopes.
Will we leave our house?
Never.
Great, thank you. Okay, if there's no further discussion, item number 14 is future board meeting agenda items. We have a retreat coming up on February 7th, and then we have regular board meetings on February 15th and March 14th. So turn it over to Mr. DeGuara.
So for our retreat, we'll be talking about the results of the bond survey. The bond survey is in the field as we speak. It's progressing. I believe they'll wrapping it up January 25th, as I recall. We'll talk about governance, do some work to renew and continue to build our relationships with each other. And I didn't put it on there, but we'll do some learner profile work within that. School highlights will return in February with Nesbitt. We'll have Ed Services, specifically special programs. Director Nuba will be talking about special programs. We'll have a facilities update. By that February meeting, I'll also have had the opportunity to tour our schools with subgroups of the board. So we have that scheduled for that conversation, and my agenda just went away here.
Assembly.
I'll just piggyback over here. And then in February, March is Cipriani, another Ed Services, second interim. Enrollment update, we'll have completed our first enrollment period by then, so we'll have some more information there. Facilities we're keeping ongoing with facility master planning, in Prop 28. What's that?
Yeah, exactly. We can discuss potential future topics. I saw Mr. Leinbach and then Mr. Koss.
Okay, so retreat looks great, and I believe we have another retreat in April. And that will be facilities master plan. Is it gonna be on that topic, or is,
Yeah, I think that's how we aligned it.
okay, perfect, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Koss.
My fellow trustee clarified the question I had. I didn't realize, I was like, did we pass the consent agenda? But that was part of revising the consent agenda, pulling one of the items that we
Yes, thank you.
went so fast.
Short, great. Thank you. Any other suggestions for future board meeting agenda items?
Regular agenda item for enrollment update, that is going the in-between time, where we have internal and we have external and internal enrollment adjustments. And what I guess I'm curious about is school choice when it comes to the middle schools and our ongoing evolution of those sites. We see that Nesbitt's coming up, and then we've already had Ralston present. But we've got a lot of things under development at the smaller sites right now. When is middle school choice? The due date for the internal kids, it's coming up, right? I think there's a presentation at the end of this month or something.
Yeah, I will get those dates to the board in a board update tomorrow. Also coming up next week, we have our middle school information night. By at the end of the month, we have our TKK information nights.
Yeah.
So I'll make sure I get the board all of those dates, so you can if they're not on your calendar, get them on your calendar as appropriate. And I'll share the survey window that is tentative at this point. Yeah, we're hitting that the spring really quick, huh?
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe Julie's gonna come through with it. No? Tomorrow, Julie, I'll share the dates tomorrow.
Before the board update, we'll have the numbers. Or close to it.
And folks wanting to come into the district that say like when we have this influx of families that come in, sort of the fifth, sixth graders. What is that first enrollment period? Not just the TKers and the Kers, but that group as well.
Yeah, first enrollment period ends. I could just look.
March. It's a while.
Yeah, March 15th.
Got it. All right, thank you.
And just a clarifying question to go along with that. I do have a rising middle schooler, so I knew about when the middle school info night was. For the TK and kindergarten, are those going to be online, or are they going to be in person, or a combination?
They will be virtual.
Okay.
Yeah, we're gonna keep those virtual. We're doing it a little bit differently. So I think for that type of event, I think actually virtual works pretty well. It gets a lot of people in the evening. We will have the one middle school event that'll be recorded. All of them will be recorded, but middle school will be recorded. We'll post it online. That is facilitated by our 3 middle school principals jointly. The other 3 will have 3 TKK presentations. They will all be identical. They will be at different times in the day, and they will be facilitated by different principals. Right. So all of our principals are working together, and what that presentation looks like last year, it'll be the same content. We want to give people the opportunity to get to know their school after they've been assigned their school, right? We feel like that's the best way to approach it.
They'll all be recorded,
Yes.
posted online. They're all at 6 o'clock though.
Were they all at 6? I thought there was one in the morning. No.
Middle school choice forms are due February 25th.
Great, thank you. Any other potential agenda items for the future? All right. So that is it. We are going to reconvene to close session. There will not be a report. So I call this meeting to close session at 7:42 p.m.